My son folded his arms across his chest and stood squarely in the doorway. "Dad," he said without meeting my eyes, "today isn't a good day. You should leave." For a moment, I honestly thought he was teasing me. Then I noticed he wasn't smiling. Behind him, I could hear laughter coming from the dining room. Plates clinked together. Someone uncorked a bottle of wine. Family. My family. Inside the house I'd bought 27 years earlier. Yet I wasn't being allowed through the front door. I stared at my son for several long seconds. "You're serious?" I finally asked. He swallowed. "I don't want to argue today." That was all I needed to hear. I turned around without another word, walked back to my truck, and made a phone call that changed every one of their lives. My name is Michael Carter. I'm 64 years old, retired, and until 3 years ago, I managed safety inspections for one of the largest commercial construction companies in western Pennsylvania. For more than 3 decades, my job was finding cracks before buildings collapsed. I never imagined the biggest crack I'd failed to notice would be inside my own family. My wife, Susan, and I have been married for 39 years. She's the kind of woman who remembers birthdays without looking at a calendar and somehow always knows when someone is pretending to be fine. We raised one son, Daniel. For most of his life, I believed he'd become the kind of man any father would be proud of. Hardworking, honest, responsible. When he married Olivia 6 years ago, I welcomed her into the family without hesitation. She was confident, intelligent, and worked as an operations coordinator for a private investment company downtown. She asked thoughtful questions, never arrived empty-handed, and always remembered Susan preferred herbal tea instead of coffee. Everything about her seemed genuine, or so I believed. After retiring, Susan and I settled into a quiet routine. Sunday dinners, weekend gardening, fishing trips with my oldest friend, Robert. Life wasn't exciting, but it was peaceful. Then the small things began happening. Daniel suddenly became interested in our finances. He casually asked whether our house was fully paid off. A week later, he wondered if we'd ever updated our wills. Another time, he suggested we should make things easier for the future by putting someone else's name on our property documents. I laughed it off. "I don't plan on going anywhere," I told him. He smiled. "I know, Dad. I'm just thinking ahead." Looking back, that conversation keeps replaying in my head. Because he already was thinking ahead, just not in the way I imagined. A month later, a courier delivered paperwork addressed to me from a company I'd never heard of. It referenced a consultation I'd supposedly requested regarding estate planning. I threw it away, assuming it was junk mail. Then my bank called asking why I had canceled an appointment I'd never scheduled. That bothered me. Not enough to panic, just enough to pay attention. A few days later, I visited the bank to renew a savings certificate. The branch manager greeted me with an uncomfortable smile. "Mr. Carter," she said carefully, "before we continue, I need to verify something." She turned her monitor toward me. My stomach dropped. Someone had submitted documents authorizing another individual to access my financial records. The signature looked similar to mine, but it wasn't mine. Not even close. I asked for copies immediately. The authorization listed Olivia as my legal representative. I had never signed it, never discussed it, never even considered it. Within an hour, I was sitting in the office of attorney Karen Mitchell, a woman whose reputation for handling financial fraud was well known throughout the county. She studied the paperwork quietly. Finally, she looked at me. "Mr. Carter," she said, "this isn't a paperwork mistake." "What is it?" "It's fraud." One word, quietly spoken, yet somehow louder than anything I'd ever heard. Karen immediately contacted the bank and froze every transaction connected to my accounts while her office began tracing where the documents originated. She told me not to confront anyone. Not Daniel. Not Olivia. Not even Susan until we understood exactly what had happened. That might have been the hardest instruction I'd ever received. For the next 3 weeks, I smiled through family dinners while pretending nothing had changed. Every laugh sounded different. Every conversation felt rehearsed. Every time Olivia asked how retirement was treating me, I wondered whether she already believed my house would soon belong to her. Karen's investigation moved quickly. Security records, electronic signatures, document histories. Each day another piece fell into place. By the end of the 3rd week, there was no longer any doubt. The documents hadn't been forged by a stranger. They had been prepared using information only someone close to me could have known. And every trail led back to the same place. My son's home. The phone rang early one Friday morning. Karen didn't waste time. We have enough evidence, she said. Enough for what? To stop this. I looked out the kitchen window where Susan was trimming roses she'd planted years earlier. She still had no idea the home surrounding those flowers had nearly been stolen. Karen spoke again. I need one thing from you. What? Stay calm. I can do that. I hope so. Because this weekend, they're going to show us exactly who they really are. The following Monday, I met Karen Mitchell in her office just after 8 in the morning. She didn't waste time on small talk. 3 thick folders sat neatly stacked on the conference table. I think you should sit down, she said. I managed a nervous smile. I've been sitting for most of retirement. This won't feel like retirement. She opened the first folder. The bank traced the authorization request. She slid a printed timeline across the table. It wasn't submitted online. Someone brought the paperwork into a branch office. I studied the document. The date matched a Tuesday in late March. What about the signature? Karen handed me another report. A forensic examiner compared it with 20 years of signatures from your banking records. And it wasn't written by you. I wasn't surprised. Hearing someone else confirm it still made my stomach tighten. Karen opened the second folder. The person who delivered the paperwork showed identification using your driver's license number. My license never left my wallet. I know. She looked directly at me, which means someone copied it. I leaned back in my chair. Daniel had borrowed my wallet once the previous winter while helping me replace a broken fence. He'd needed my driver's license to pick up materials from a hardware store that required proof of age for renting equipment. At the time, it hadn't seemed unusual. Now every memory felt different. Karen continued. We also obtained security footage from the bank. Can you identify the person? The image isn't clear enough for court. She paused. But the vehicle is. She placed a photograph in front of me. A dark blue SUV. I recognized it instantly. It belonged to Olivia. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question I'd been avoiding for weeks. Does Daniel know? Karen folded her hands. I don't know, but someone inside that house does. Driving home, I couldn't stop replaying old conversations. Daniel asking about our will. Olivia insisting we should simplify our finances. Their repeated offers to help with paperwork. Individually, each conversation sounded harmless. Together, they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. Susan noticed something was wrong before I even reached the kitchen. You look pale. I tried to brush it off. Long meeting. She crossed her arms. Michael, 40 years of marriage had taught me there was no point pretending. I told her everything. The forged documents. The investigation. The evidence. She listened quietly from beginning to end. When I finished, she remained silent for nearly a full minute. Finally, she whispered, Our own son. I don't know if he planned it, but he lived in that house. I nodded. Tears filled her eyes. I changed his diapers. I taught him to ride a bicycle. She looked toward the family photographs hanging on the wall. When did we stop knowing him? I didn't have an answer. 3 days later, Karen called again. We're finished. Finished. The investigation. She explained that electronic records connected the paperwork to a printer registered under Olivia's office account. Several draft versions had been recovered from cloud storage after a subpoena. One contained handwritten notes discussing the value of our home. Another listed our investment accounts. Everything had been prepared weeks before the forged documents reached the bank. This wasn't spontaneous, Karen said. It was planned. I felt something inside me finally settle. For weeks I'd hoped there had been some misunderstanding. Now hope was gone. Only facts remained. So what happens now? That depends on you. What do you mean? We can notify investigators immediately. Or you can confront them first. I looked out my office window. Snow had begun falling across the backyard. Tiny white flakes landing on the old oak tree Daniel used to climb as a child. I want to hear the truth from my son. Karen nodded. I expected you'd say that. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Friday evening, Daniel called. Dad, we're having everyone over Sunday. For what? Just family dinner. His voice sounded completely normal, almost cheerful. Olivia's parents are coming too. I closed my eyes. Sounds nice. You and Mom will be there? We'll come. After hanging up, Susan looked at me. Are we really doing this? We deserve answers. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. No matter what happens, we face it together. Sunday arrived cold and gray. Susan and I drove in near silence. Neither of us mentioned why my briefcase rested on the back seat. Inside it were copies of every document Karen had prepared. Not because I wanted a fight, because I wanted the truth. The house looked warm and inviting. Cars lined the driveway. Laughter drifted through the open dining room window. Everything appeared perfectly normal, until Daniel opened the front door. His smile disappeared the instant he saw the briefcase in my hand. Dad, he glanced over his shoulder toward the dining room, then back at me. Can we talk outside? I knew, right then, that he understood exactly why I had come. Daniel stepped outside and quietly closed the front door behind him. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The sound of conversation drifted through the windows while we stood on opposite sides of the porch. Finally, he sighed. Dad, I know why you're here. I hoped you wouldn't. He lowered his eyes. I didn't think it would go this far. Those words landed harder than any confession. So you knew? He nodded once. I knew Olivia was trying to arrange paperwork. She told me it was only to make things easier if something ever happened to you. I opened my briefcase and handed him a copy of the forensic report. He scanned the first page. His face lost its color. That's impossible. No, I said quietly. It's documented. He turned another page, then another. When he reached the bank records, his hands began to shake. I never saw these. But you knew documents existed. I thought they were legitimate. I looked directly into his eyes. Did you ever ask why I hadn't signed them myself? He couldn't answer. Instead, he leaned against the porch railing and buried his face in his hands. I was stupid. No, I replied. You were willing to believe something because it benefited you. There was a difference. The front door opened. Olivia stepped outside. She looked from Daniel to me before noticing the papers in his hands. What are you doing? She asked. Daniel didn't respond. She walked closer. Then she saw the heading on the report. Her expression changed instantly. You hired a lawyer. I hired one the day I discovered someone forged my signature. She folded her arms. I wasn't trying to steal anything. Then why didn't you ask me? She hesitated. We were under pressure. I know. The business wasn't doing well. I know. We were going to lose everything. I nodded slowly. And you decided the answer was risking everything Susan and I spent 40 years building. She looked away. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I almost laughed. No one ever plans for their mistakes to be discovered. Daniel finally spoke. Olivia, she interrupted him. I did it for us. No, he answered quietly. You did it without asking me how far I was willing to go. Silence settled over the porch. Inside the house, someone called Daniel's name. None of us answered. I picked up my briefcase. My attorney has already submitted everything to the authorities. Olivia closed her eyes. So that's it. No. I looked at my son. This is the beginning. I wasn't talking about the legal case. I was talking about trust. The investigation moved quickly after that. The forged authorization was voided before any money changed hands. The bank strengthened security on every one of our accounts. Olivia resigned from her position before her employer completed its internal review. Within weeks, investigators formally charged her with financial fraud and document forgery. She accepted responsibility rather than forcing the case to trial. Daniel moved into a small apartment across town. For months we barely spoke. Not because I hated him, because neither of us knew how to bridge the distance that had opened between us. Susan took it the hardest. She never stopped loving our son. But love and trust are not the same thing. One can survive long after the other has been broken. Winter eventually became spring. One Saturday morning my phone rang. It was Daniel. Dad. Yes. I know I don't deserve it. But would you have breakfast with me? I agreed. We met at a little diner we'd visited dozens of times when he was growing up. For the first 10 minutes we talked about nothing important. Coffee, weather, baseball. Finally he looked at me. I should have asked questions. Yes. I should have believed you before anyone else. Yes. I can't change what happened. No. He stared into his coffee. But I can spend the rest of my life proving I've learned from it. For the first time in nearly a year, I believed him. Forgiveness isn't a single decision. It's a series of small moments. A phone call, a conversation, a shared breakfast, a willingness to try again. Trust returns much more slowly. Sometimes it never returns completely. But families don't survive because they never fail. They survive because someone eventually decides the truth matters more than pride. Today, Susan and I are still living in the same house. The garden she planted years ago is fuller than ever. Every Sunday afternoon, Daniel stops by for coffee. Sometimes we sit on the porch without saying much. That's enough. Because peace doesn't always arrive with dramatic speeches. Sometimes it arrives quietly, one honest conversation at a time. And after everything our family endured, quiet is something I no longer take for granted.